The things that I love, I need them on a regular basis. If I take a few days not listening to music, I feel my body is craving the sensation of listening to those sound waves. I really feel I need that to feel human.
I really wanted to have you on here because I heard your music at Hindemith last summer, and as soon as I heard it, your piece, I never really do this. I was really forward with you, and I went up to you. You didn't know who the hell I was. I said, Alex, I'm a big fan, as if I've been following you for a while, but I was a fan, instant fan. I said, if you ever come to New York, I really want to have you on the show. And then you wrote to me many months later and you remembered to write that. I'm very happy that you're here. So thank you so much for coming.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So the piece that I heard is very evocative of a lot of the music that you're writing right now. And I want to just actually dive straight into a piece. I want to start because I want to give everybody a chance to see what you're up to from the get-go so they can hear what I'm talking about. So this is a piece called Spit Crystal Yeast-Rack Dripping a la Orange from 2023. So let's play a couple minutes of that. It's the first time there's like this chorale kind of section with this double swanny whistle thing. So it's like the first time the music kind of like drops off and becomes more chilled out.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember this part.
I know a bit.
Yeah.
Chilled out is what I'm all about.
Yeah. But yeah, I wanted to know, like, especially from this section or your music in general, like how did you come up with the voice like this? Because in contemporary classical music, we don't ever hear really anything like this. I mean, maybe the closest thing I can think of is like John Zorn or Frank Zappa. But even that, I mean, even comparing it to those guys, I don't think it does justice to what you're doing right now.
Thanks for saying. My answer to that, I think, is through feeling. I felt it's a feeling that was very small and abstract when I was a child and a teenager, and I didn't know what it was, and I followed it in this way and that way, and I feel that I followed it here, and this is the thing. In one sense, I choose to make this music every day, but in another sense, I have to do it. This is my life, or this is what makes me feel most alive, and that's why I do it. And and making this music with this voice is the thing that makes me feel most alive and that I'm most desperate to do with the time that I am alive for.
How long have you been writing kind of like in this manner, let's say? Is it something that you developed over a long period of time? Because I think you and I are pretty similar ages. We're both in our kind of early 30s, right? So I feel like, at least with me personally, I feel like last 5 years maybe I've felt like, okay, I feel like I'm writing the music I should be writing, right? And I think you are in that stage too. Did that happen also kind of recently like that?
I have a more useful answer to that question. I think the shortest answer for that is so I'm 33 and a half now, and maybe there's a couple of pieces that I wrote when I was 25, 26, 27, that this was the start of, or it was the end of the beginning, or something. There were pieces that was like, this is the feeling of listening to this piece is what I want. This is what I want the music to feel like to listen to, something like that. So actually, these pieces were, but in some ways, I mean, there's still some things that I wrote when I was a teenager that I like. There's a lead sheet I wrote when I was 17 that I'm still behind this, but it is. It's a different style and it's a different set of idioms. And I think there were some things that came for me a bit earlier, and it was a gradual thing. It wasn't something that I conceived. My voice as a composer, I didn't conceive beforehand. It's just that I was making it, with dirty clay-covered, muddy hands, and it started to come together and function as a voice. And I think the last thing that came into place was the harmony, actually. Some things I was writing before here were rhythmically and gesturally a related set of languages, but the harmony language was actually very close, but it felt very different. So that's nice. Also because I was conscious, as many people who do music and create music are, that harmony is like this amazing magic, and is often lots of people articulate that harmony is the thing that pulls them into music and that they're most sensually stimulated by. And probably that's probably the case with me. Not that we need to distinguish between the difficult musical parameters, but this was the last thing to come into place entirely. But maybe it had the longest journey to go on.
I think harmony is like that for most composers, especially today, because harmony used to be almost like this pseudo de facto thing. Like everybody was writing in the same harmonic vocabulary, maybe. You can even say with early jazz in some ways that the harmony was kind of similar, and then it became a lot crazier further along in the 20th century. But what I found very interesting, what you said, which I think would be helpful for people listening, is that you kind of started writing music around 17, right? Is that accurate?
Oh, I might have misphrased that. I've always written music.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, but, like even before then?
Yes, I was just thinking of a specific song form in a lead sheet that I wrote when I was 17 that I still like. We were lucky enough and we had a piano in the house, and I was playing it and making stuff. So I was doing this informally as a kid. Yeah,
but you didn't find your voice. So my point is, you didn't find your voice, like the kind of music you're writing, the music you feel comfortable writing, right? Or at least that you feel like you have to say until 25-ish.
Yeah.
And now you're really, I would say now you're really in full swing. This is like, peak Alex Paxton, like right now, this is, like Stravinsky writing The Rite of Spring kind of thing, like at age 30, like that's how I feel looking from the outside. I know you probably don't feel that way, but to me as an outside looking in, that's how I feel when I've listened to the breadth of your music. It's like you're in this like amazing period where you're extremely creative, and it's also very reminiscent of the time we live in too. That's the other part, and to have those two things collide, it takes a lot of time. And that's kind of my point, that you've been doing this a while, and it took a lot of time to get to that stage. It's not like Mozart coming out of the womb,
For sure.
And I think that's what many people assume that a composer is. They just kind of, oh, they're a genius person. This is something we were talking about upstairs a little bit, like they're a genius person that just happened to be like that. But no, it takes time to foster that kind of sound.
It's a compass bearing I've been following for a while, for sure. And I really feel it's my whole life, finding, even before I was able to access this really amazing musical education I had from like 18 or maybe a little bit before or something, that this is my way of being in the world that is relating to everything else about being in the world. This is really what I want to do, and it does feel really good. I love writing. I love this is just my favorite thing to do, and I kind of and I've loved it for a while. I think the feeling is intensifying. The more I do, the more I'm able to grow my craft, the more I'm able to say the thing that I want to say, whatever that means, and that feels good. That feels the intensive feeling of being able to do it. So I love it even more every year, really.
I mean, it's funny that you say it because I feel the same way.
Okay.
I remember, I mentioned this on the show before that I had a period where I kind of like lost the love a little bit for like, why am I doing what? Like, what's the purpose of it? But during lessons with Haas, actually, by the way, my teacher, his love for the craft was so infectious, and the guy is, well past, I mean, he's been doing it for so long, and I'm like, how is this guy loving this more than me? There's a problem here.
Okay.
Like, how is that? So I get that feeling from your music as well. What are the mechanics then of how you go about it then? Because I know you play the trombone extremely well, and you have your own unique way of playing that too. Does that factor in to the writing process, or are you more like maybe more traditional like me, sitting there with pencil, paper, and kind of figuring it out until it's kind of formed in your head?
It feeds the writing process in a kind of indirect way, because I practice this every day, and I'm also, forging a way with the trombone that is of the body and this smaller amount of language. But the actual mechanics of writing music, I am a little bit old-fashioned in the way I function. I write the tunes. I write all the tunes, and then I harmonize the tunes, and then I orchestrate it.
Okay.
And
so
for me,
it's pretty traditional.
Yeah,
in a way.
yeah. And but I will use any method of writing that will achieve what I want to do. I do some stuff on pencil and paper. I do a lot of stuff in notation software, but also in a DAW. And I definitely also keep loads of voice notes and improvisations, and I'm not religious in the way that I take in the process that I make the music. But it is important to me that I enjoy it, and that I have this intensive feeling when I'm writing. And this is something I've purposely fashioned over the last decade or so, is that it was important to me that I'm getting in contact with a kind of special magic energy when I'm writing. And that's not because I'm waiting to be a vessel of the divine and waiting for the inspiration to come. It's because I'm setting this up for myself. I'm setting up my own playground.
And it's not in a divine way. I mean, I like the use of the word playground. My teacher Haas says church. Okay. So it's a divine thing, but I don't think he goes to church though. But he made his own church in a way, right? This idea,
that's a nice phrase.
I think that's kind of similar to what you're doing. But
okay,
the feeling
that is a nice phrase. Yeah.
Feeling is different. I want to skip ahead now, or not skip, go straight into another piece of yours called Shrimp. Is it BIT or BIT? I'm gonna BIT. Shrimp BIT Babyface. This is from a couple of years ago. This piece has a little bit more brass playing on it. The last one didn't, so we'll hear some of the trumpet writing, which is fun. And the other thing about this piece too is you mentioned using a DAW, a digital audio workstation. So there is a lot of these electronic sounds in there, and these kind of almost sounding like 8-bit video game music sounds. So let's hear a couple minutes of that. really surprised when I heard this. This is the part that has this orchestral vamp near the end. It's about 16 minutes into the piece. You have these orchestral hits that you sometimes hear in movies. The bum, bum, bum.
Yeah.
Bum, bum. Bum, bum, bum. I'm like, wow, I haven't heard that in such a long time. That kind of almost 90s, early 2000s hits that you hear in film music, or like in these old, not film music, but in these old maybe cartoons or things like that. Like where have we heard that sound before?
Oh, well, I wish if I was the musician I wanted to be, I'd be able to tell you exactly the lineage now, but there's a YouTube video of it. You could definitely Google the history of this sample, but because it was used in hip hop and lots of sampled music for ages. And now it's in every cheap school keyboard has an orchestral hit thing.
It's a common sound. And
it's from Bernstein's conducting Stravinsky's The Firebird, 1967 or 1961. Wait, it's from
Firebird?
Yeah.
That kind of 2T sound,
bam,
that thing. On its own is from Firebird.
The opening, yeah. You check it out, but just Google it because that's the only reason that I used to know this lineage, because I watched a YouTube video of it, it's super interesting. And someone like Questlove, who's written these amazing books about this lineage of music, and he would be able to. Maybe I read it in this book first. Maybe he would be able to track the lineage of who sampled this and how it became so popular. But now it's so detached from, everyone's forgotten that it's from Bernstein's Firebird recording.
I had no idea.
And it's so prevalent and common, and people still using it today because it's such a common sample that you can, in a chromatic keyboard. Dun, 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 dun. But that's not the reason I used it. It's just it's an interesting history. I used it because because I was attracted to it, and it was this really evocative, sonically sensual sound thing.
Yeah, I mean, and the music is not about that sound either. I mean, there were 16 minutes leading up to this moment, and it's the first time we hear that sound. So you have this way of having like a lot of sounds that people are actually quite familiar with in everyday life. Like this kind of like, I call it like, I think you have another name for it, but in my mind, I call it like black MIDI, like this, I think it's a genre of music on YouTube where it's just like a mess of MIDI notes, and they call it black MIDI because on the sheet of music, it's just all black.
Sure.
It's just like no white space at all between the notes. And you have this kind of thing happening in your music too, although I don't think you call it that. You call it something else.
Well, I call my electronic world infinite MIDI synths. Black MIDI is a brilliant extremity of genre that's meant to crash the computer. That's the goal. So sometimes, but yeah, or it's like Nan Caro, 21st century Nan Caro. There's some bits of Frank Zappa that I really love, but I'm not really, covered in Zappa in my listening. But the one track I think is my favorite Zappa track, which was a helpful track for me, was G-Spot Tornado from the album Jazz to Hell. And he's using the sine clavier in a similar way, but not as crazy as Nan Caro or Black MIDI. But he's using a sine clavier, and he's doing the rhythms he wants to do. And I once heard some clever, probably YouTube person talk about this being really interesting because this album being interesting because it happened before Ligeti's piano etudes.
Oh, okay.
And it has a similar set of materials.
So you're saying the Zappa was before the Ligeti piano etudes.
This is what I remember, though. I don't know these in dates encyclopedia, but encyclopedically. But I seem to remember reading or watching something that was taking an interesting take on the Zappa Jazz from Hell album, which is the one where he's using the sine clavier synth, and G-Spot Tornado. Nan Caro. I think I discovered black MIDI after I'd start making these things. But also, it's like it's having what I always wanted. I have this feeling a lot when I'm composing now. It's like, I can do this. This is what I always wanted to do when I was a student or a teenager or trying to make music and not quite getting the right set of feelings. And this 21st century Nan Caro language with what I call my infinite MIDI synths, I can have any notes I want. I can have as many notes because and I can control all those notes. I love that.
So what is the leap then from like youth wanting to do this music for a while, right? Or like feeling like you're a teenager again, right? What is the leap from that to like what you're doing now? Like what had to happen between then and now for you to like feel comfortable writing in this way?
Well, that's really interesting because I'm not sure what had to happen. I only know what did happen. I think it was important for me to discover. I didn't hear so much contemporary music until I was 18, until I got to music college. I was just because I started at music college as a jazz trombonist. I was privileged to have some kind of good jazz education when I was a teenager, and so this was my path. So this was very important for discovering loads of things, many things that jazz education can teach, including rhythm and harmony and line and the experience. If you're a horn player, it kind of felt to me anyway, a horn player, we're looking for a voice for ourselves, but it has to exist in this American songbook form or in some other form as a single line instrument, but we're describing or engaging with a lot of vertical harmony. So that's an intensive experience in itself, and there are lots of other important intensive experiences, but feel significant to me. And
but the education you had in the undergrad, that like what the equivalent of undergrad, I guess, in the UK is. That was mainly jazz trombone. That was the degree, or what was the degree called?
Started my undergrad at the Royal Academy of Music in London, studying jazz performance as a principal study trombonist. So, jazz trombone.
So it's like formally you're coming from a performer, not just performer, but jazz performer. That's the baseline training, at least from a college perspective.
So most of the education was done in a small group of 5 people. So they took a band, a small band's worth of performers, and that was the year group, and that's how we learnt together. But then I swapped. I became really excited by new music, and I swapped. So I then finished my undergrad as a composer. So I did 2 years as a jazz trombonist and 3 years as a composer. And this was really important because I think this orchestrating thing is quite difficult, not impossible, but quite difficult to teach yourself, I think. So I think I'm very grateful for that bit of my education, how to write for a real life orchestra, because it's not just things that make sense and things that are attractive. There are lots of cultures that is useful to teach and learn in notation and stuff. So I think that's important. And then something that I did that my teachers knew of the world there, but I think was probably my own attractiveness to it, was the lots of these mechanics of modernism and stuff, lots of musics that are being explored, especially in the second half of the 20th century, learning to control and shape pitch and rhythm and all of these things. These are things that are in my craft.
Yeah,
so
that is an understatement.
So I think it's a mixture. It's a mixture of those things, but also and then a really important thing that I was missing when I was a student that really helped me. Two more important things. Firstly was listening, to be a prolific listener. When I was a student, this is a very common composer experience, especially with grown up, any age, is that we're focusing on our music and it's too much stimulation to listen to a lot of music in the day. And it's too overbearing and we need to concentrate. And sometimes I have a little bit like this, but it was really important for me. At some point, I met a few composers who I felt inspiring, and they were prolific.
In person.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so. And I was just speaking to them, or I met them, and they just listened to loads of music. It was kind of fuck it. I just listened to lots of music, and this really changed. This is really what I needed the whole time. I needed to be super prolific listener, and I'm quite a prolific listener, though I know people who are more prolific than me. But generally, this is what I feed off, and I needed this. And I don't think everyone needs this. Some artists work really well in isolation, and that's beautiful too. But for me, I really needed, and probably will continue to need, to feast off everything that's happening, and to diversity through everything. Interestingly, that at the same time that this happened, I know I rarely listen. I used to listen very obsessively to like an individual composer or a few individuals, and I'd obsess about their music, and I'd internalize it in the same way that jazz musicians speak about internalizing solos from John Coltrane or something. I do this, so I now have a prolific listener life, but I don't really fall in love so much with music that is composed by individuals. The music that I listen to repetitively and internalize is either oral tradition, or it's electronic or improvised or somehow so this would include jazz, and it's less notated individuals.
Like when you're listening to music, do you ascribe whether you like it or not like it, and then that's how you keep finding new pieces of music based on what you liked before? Or is it like, no, I'm going to keep listening to as many diverse sets of pieces as I can, even though I like the jazzy pieces, the improvised pieces, the electronic pieces? Like how does your listening experience change over time?
I don't think I'm not routinely deciding whether I like something or not. I think I am aware whether I love something or not. That is a really important thing, because actually it's really difficult to find music that one absolutely loves. And then at the other end, sometimes it's super interesting when I just think this is terrible, or I hate this piece of music.
Yeah.
That is really important too. And often it can be really fun to play a therapist line there. Well, what does this say about why you hate this? Or this is a brilliant experience as well. So maybe this is too mild. It's really important if I love something, but new things I feed off a lot. I think I need two types of food, and one type of food is new things, new pieces, new creators, new ways of making music, and the other type of thing is the things that I love. And this goes to my soul. Also, sometimes I love a small piece of a bit of music or something. So I think that's important. And I need the things that I love. I need them on a regular basis. If I take a few days not listening to music, I feel my body is craving the sensation of listening to those sound waves. I really feel I need that to feel human, or to...
Yeah, no, I feel the same. Of course. I mean, I feel that if you're a composer writing for as long as we have, and hopefully we have a long way to go too, you have to have this. Otherwise you can kind of fall off mentally in terms of continuing the craft. I think actually this is the students that I encounter, at least in my personal anecdotal experience, this happens to be the weakest part of the whole experience, and probably the most underrated part to their eyes, that they have to be listening to music a lot, and a lot more than they think.
I think this is true. Oh, but it's not what I thought you were going to say. Also, with young composers I meet, it's really important that they keep an eye on the things that they absolutely love, because it's very easy, especially when you're a student, there's lots of new things, lots of new experiences, lots of people with often very strong opinions. Whatever they say, it's most important to hold on to the things that you love. And the things you will love may change, and that's great. And it's great to hear new things and to be provoked, and if you hate something, you ask yourself why you hate it, and that's great. But you have to keep on to the lifeblood things. And also, I think it's different for our generation and younger, although I also know people who substantially older than me, who have changed, but we now live in the world of the internet, and it's totally different. Even when I was studying 10 or 14 years ago, whatever, most music I had to go to the library because most music that I was interested in wasn't on streaming services, so I had to go to a public library or the university library, which was very curated. But now we can really listen to, not everything is online, but there are a lot of musics that are pretty obscure that you can find online. And that's amazing. It's a totally different world from certainly the people that even are a little bit older than me grew up in, and definitely the people who are my professors and teachers. That's a very different listening experience world for them.
Yeah, even when we were at Gdamis Festival where we met, one of the other composers who sat in your chair maybe a year ago, Artun, Chaykhim, he is really obsessed with this genre of like mall music.
Okay.
Like, I don't know if you heard his piece, but it's like the piece incorporates like this kind of very backgroundy kind of music, very like stereotypical music you would hear like in a mall or something, but he combined it in such a way that was just made it like so fresh and kind of like how your music is. And how would he have encountered that kind of music otherwise without the internet? Because there's like a subgenre of people, a little community of people that like share this music and listen to this music, right? I don't think it would have been possible without that.
Yeah. There are some beautiful places of the internet that can find things like this. Well, also all these oral tradition musics, and like the Alan Lomax recordings have only recently been available on streaming stuff. Beforehand, a lot of it was archived. I think a lot of it's still archived. There's a lovely recording on Bandcamp, I can't remember the name or the label, of that I loved. It was such a great experience listening to, and there's like 4 discs of them, and they were discs of local pirate radio adverts, because it was only recently that you could have lots of different radio stations in the UK, and beforehand I don't know what the date is, but they were all pirate in the 90s. They were all pirate radios, and they would be on boats outside. You
mean literally pirates? Like literally people on boats? And what do you mean on boats?
They weren't like Jack Sparrow pirates,
right? But they're on boats and they're kind of doing illegal activity. And
I don't know whether it was illegal or they were just, because it was on boats, it was outside the legal jurisdiction.
Okay. Right.
But this is where a lot of seminal British radio happened. I really don't. I'm not a specialist on this history, but I know that much. And this is where all the musics that were subversive or cultural, phenomenons that happened in the UK, I think have this relationship. And so there's this album that was a great experience that was like one of these internet niches, is rave adverts for raves in London from the 90s. Okay. So it was like a genre of radio adverts, which are beautiful in themselves, but with music and with this kind of teenage acting style and little bits of music. Anyway, yes,
absolutely.
internet.
No,
good.
Absolutely. I mean, for sure. I want to get on track here with your last piece.
Yeah.
Okay. This piece called, and again, with all your pieces, I got to be careful because one word after the other doesn't make sense. So I can't they're hard to remember, but they're very evocative. So this one's no different. Blue Chew Cheerio Earpiece.
Yes.
All right, let's do it. This piece in particular has electric guitar also, so it's one of the more obvious uses of electronics because everything else is a synthesizer and you don't really know where the sound is coming from. This one has an electric guitar, you can actually see it, which is interesting. And then the other thing with this piece that was different than the other two pieces is you had an improviser, and I noticed in the score there was no instrument labeled. I was like looking at what instrument is that? It sounds like a trombone, but I'm not 100% sure just because of the way it's being played. Is it meant to be for any kind of improviser, or is it meant for trombone? I think it was a trombone.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's a set of pieces that I've written for me to perform.
Okay.
And I'm a trombonist. So this was me playing. But they're written for, it could be any improviser, but it should be an improviser who has a voice as a solo improviser. Some of them would probably be better suited to someone who has some kind of experience in jazz, because this is a great place to navigate certain harmonies and whatever. But it could also, it wouldn't have to be a jazz musician, and many of the pieces could also be played by other improvising styles and backgrounds and languages. But a lot of the times I've written them because that was part of the commission, or they're so much fun to play with people that it's hard to turn down. But I would like other people to perform them.
That was my next question. Yeah. Has anybody else done your music but with their improvisation? Because I can imagine it's extremely difficult to get into your world, but once you're in it, it's a shitload of fun. But I feel like there's a barrier to entry a little bit. A lot of your music, it's influenced by improvisation. But when you look at the score, I mean, every freaking thing is written down. Even the improvised parts, or the things you think are improvisation, are written or so meticulously written down. I wonder how somebody else would come into this world. Yeah,
I like playing with I like playing with those things, but almost all of my music is entirely notated in this very detailed way. And the improvised parts, I just decide on and off, play, don't play, and that I will then know that there will be a space for another voice going on top here. A few times I wrote a piece last year for that me and Jennifer Walsh and I performed with the symphony orchestra, and a few times on my albums I've got other people too.
Jennifer Walsh, another amazing young composer as well. But where does she live?
Between Ireland and London.
Okay,
and
so
Oxford,
she lives over.
perhaps.
Okay, yeah, I didn't think she was in the States.
But I don't think it's unreasonable. They kind of function like concertos for improvisers, but I wouldn't want someone to just come and improvise who hasn't heard it before. I'd want them to learn the part. That's what I do. I learn the piece. I learn the harmonies.
Learn your own piece.
Yeah.
Right.
And I learned to play because I can write some nice, juicy, gnarly harmonies in 10 minutes now that would take me a year to learn, to play over them in a way that is free. There's a different learning process that goes on. I would love people to play them, to do other versions of them. And so sometimes I don't really write in anything in the improvising part, but sometimes I write tonalities in. Usually the harmonies are a little bit not quite right for jazz chord symbols, but I write broad tonal areas to remind me where where and when to change and stuff
So
like that.
there are markers like that. I mean, those are things that you are telling yourself, okay, I got to be in some D land, I got to be in some G land.
Well, it's not that I've got to be in some D land, but that the piece is in some kind of D-ish land, and that's a good frame of reference for me to know. My improvising voice takes a lot. I mainly practice, as an improvising trombonist, I mainly practice pitch things, and I engage with harmony and line in this way. Yeah, so I usually write these notes in just as I'm practicing. Mm-hmm. Also, sometimes when I'm writing, it feels in a different tonality entirely when I get to play it. Or
and I'm sure you're playing against the band too, in terms of pitch and of course rhythm, but maybe you're playing in a different key area than what the band is playing at times, like going against it versus going with it.
Yes, sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm thinking about that so much. My approach to the improvisation process is to learn the piece as much as possible, practice the piece as much as possible, and then in the moment just be there with the subconscious and the body.
And do you know when? So I'm just trying to, because I this is a foreign concept to me. I don't improvise really at all, or whatever you think is. I'm not a trained improviser or even a performer by that stretch. So for me, it's a foreign concept. I'm always impressed with people that could do it, because it's just, I feel like it's just another side of one's brain that you have to unlock. It's something that you can't just sit there and do. You have to learn how to do it, I think. But when you're doing like this piece in particular, you imagine where the solos would start and end, or is it more like what you said, you learn the piece and then you decide where those things start, and they could be different from piece to piece?
I decide the start and end of the improvising.
That's fixed.
In the composing. That's fixed.
Oh, that's fixed. Okay.
Although often I change my mind when I've practiced it for some reason, that actually I don't want to play here, I want to play here instead. But for me, improvising is just fast composing, and composing is just slow improvising. Oh. And it's a spectrum, and I use everything in between that spectrum. Improvising is lots of other things too, and and part of why it's so exciting is it is a gateway into so much diversity of thought and musical feeling. But generally, most of the way I think about improvising and composing is their processes to make music. Just like writing by pencil v writing in a notation software, they lend themselves to different things. I'm really interested in this. This excites me. In visual arts, you'd be aware of the difference if you're painting in oil paints or children's paints, or that artist that makes everything out of human blood or stone or wood, and you react to the material that you do, and the thing that you make will lend itself and its character to that, and build a relationship with the medium, the media. Like when you go to an art gallery, it always says this is made out of paper mache and Cheerios or something. Yeah,
they always make a point to make sure you know what it is. Right? Physically. Yeah.
This is I like this, and when we so part of my craft in making music is reacting to the media. If I'm improvising or notation software or drawing by pencil or the DAW, this is exciting to interact between these things. And also a lot of my composer craft is layering one on the other, because I want a piece to feel spontaneous, like it can turn on a dime, it can do anything, it's on its feet, it's being made in front of you. And in another sense, it's nice to be able to layer that with something that takes much more time, like kind of harmonic structures and orchestration. Takes for bloody ages to do that, and it's an orchestration. Certain types of orchestration syntax are very unlikely, though not impossible, to happen in a group improvisation context and things like this.
Well, I was going to mention these parts that are not the improvised, but these are the let's call it the orchestral parts, or the chamber, or your music feels very orchestral, even though these three pieces, I don't think there was a single piece that had more than 10 players, but it feels orchestral. Like when you say the word orchestration, right? It does. Some people think that literally means orchestrating for a large orchestra, which you've also written orchestral works as well. But orchestration can also mean like arranging for a small number of players, but you're very careful with with the combinations of the sounds?
For me, it does for sure, because I worked a little bit as a commercial orchestrator for a bit, as an assistant orchestrator. I don't think I was very good at it, but I learnt a lot doing this, because the person I wrote for is mainly an orchestrator. That's what they do. That their raison d'etre is in the orchestration itself, and I really loved the intensivity that they did that. That was their voice, was just in orchestration, in certain types of music. So the takeaway in feeling for me was, well, I want that intensivity in every layer of the composition.
You can hear that for sure.
Thanks. But then this kind of old-fashioned thing about my composer craft is that I work always in short score, even if it's just 2 instruments or 3 instruments. And for me, this is like a pencil drawing that you do on the canvas first. This is the lines and this kind of thing. And then the orchestration is the paint. And I like to, in order to, maybe it contributes to making this intensivity that goes all the way through the "is it cake though" thing of my music, is that I then like to go back and think about the paints and cook those colors a little bit more. And it may be that I know roughly what kind of sounds are going to happen here, or I might know exactly what kind of sounds are going to happen here, but it's important to me anyway to go back and cook that layer of color. And
there's another segment of your music which I personally have questions about, because I struggle with this. But it's a selfish question: is how the heck are you dealing with rhythm? Because I'm watching this score go by as I'm listening, and I'm thinking to myself, how the hell are the players able to internalize these rhythms? Because I personally feel like when I use some of these rhythms, I just can't get the players to either buy in or simply just play what's written, or I don't know what it is. But I hear your stuff and like everything is so locked in. You know, they go from 7/16 to 9/8 to 2/4 to 3/8, and nobody it doesn't seem like anyone, maybe because maybe you hear mistakes here and there, but I'm looking at the thing, I don't hear any mistakes for the most part, and I'm wondering, why is that? Is it because of the way you're writing it? Is it maybe the players you're working with? I think it's what is it? Because I've never really, maybe like with John, the closest thing I could think of is like John Adams, Son of a Chamber Symphony. There's the Roadrunner, he calls it Roadrunner. I don't know if you've heard of this piece. I'm afraid I don't know that one. I mean, it has very kind of a similar sensibility to what you're doing, but yours is like that on steroids, I feel. But it has that kind of rhythmic intensity combined with this extreme layering.
I think this is a really interesting question, and a really interesting question for young composers, and a really interesting question for classical music generally, especially in the age of the internet. Because a lot of musicians, a lot of young composers, and also myself, and also older composers, who listen to a lot of rhythmic music. Our society, you can't really escape rhythmic music, and it's wonderful and rich. And by rhythmic music, I'm talking about a lot of oral music traditions, anything with a groove, rock and pop, and a lot of electronic music, dance music, jazz, all this I mean by rhythmic music. And classical music has a different type of rhythmic tradition, a different way of so think of the way a pianist plays Chopin, or the way a conductor conducts not with a metric click, but by interpreting the phrases and slowing them down and speeding them up. And this is very beautiful and sophisticated and complex, for sure. But this is a different rhythmic tradition from somebody who grows up playing bluegrass or blues or hip hop or in a Christian rock band. This is a very different rhythmic education, and I think it's going to be really important, and I think it is really exciting in the places in classical music where this rhythmic intelligence is changing and developing and growing, so that music can be played really rhythmically. Steve Reich is also a rhythmic music as a easy hanging fruit example. Generally, classical music ensembles who are mainly the ensembles that commission me, it's different from there's a diversity of rhythmic intelligences and languages here. I encourage lots of really exciting classical musicians who are doing this, who are much more able to play music that is explicitly influenced by rhythmic musics. But another side of the thing is what you suggested, I think, is learning ways to write rhythms well for classical musicians, or even to write them in a special way in ways for different ensembles will interpret different rhythms in different ways. So one important point is that I've been working really luckily with these amazing musicians who I'm totally grateful for their work and skills and putting it in. Also, I write for the idiom that the instrument of the ensemble that I write for. The extreme example is that I've written a lot of pieces for children's orchestra from my old life, but I'm hoping that I will record them at some point. And these are made for children who have been playing 1 week or a few years and are between the ages of 4 and 11. And this is the instrument that I write for. And similarly, when I'm
super curious to hear that.
I'll send you some. You know. Yeah. I've only got these bootleg recordings from real, primary school concerts, but I'm hoping to make some better ones. But then writing for orchestra works rhythmically in a specific way, and when I write for new music ensembles, then I like to write into that instrument, and that's very exciting.
So you're aware of the different rhythmic challenges between all those ensembles, because I feel like with the orchestra I have to be very careful about rhythm more than really any other parameter, it seems, because even the distance between the first chair player and the percussion in the back, there's some physical distance that makes the sound not travel exactly together like in a chamber setting, and I think that's part of it. And then also the background of the musicians is part of it too.
Yeah, and also the music that they listen to and that they play. The ideal situation to be in for a composer is when it doesn't feel like a restriction that this ensemble can't do this thing or that thing, that you understand, one understands the idiom that you write for. And I feel this is part of the composer craft, is to, for my music anyway, is to understand this idiom and to really, I'm trying consciously to really tap in to each set of performers and what is the thing about their playing that is really feels most alive for me and hopefully for them too, and that's the same thing to inhabit with a children's orchestra, a symphony orchestra, a new music group, or a musician of jazz. The first album I made, Music for BOSCH People, are mainly jazz musicians who are reading 1 billion notes a minute, but they have a certain way of making music, making rhythm. So I think the children's orchestra experience was maybe important for me, because I've written about 2 hours of music just for primary school instrumentalists to play, and this. The challenge when I started doing that was how can I make a piece of music that feels like I want it to feel, but also is in these very limited parameters, not only about what they can do, but also in the context that I wrote these pieces, you can't just write crazy experimental music because you'd get sacked. And the kids are learning in an orthodox, normal way, and they need to play music that reflects this to some extent. On the other hand, they're 4.5 years old, or they're 7.5 years old. But then once I'm in that world and I know what this language feels like and what is really exciting, the most exciting thing for me about those pieces is that the children, it's not that those pieces will be better played by the London Symphony Orchestra, is that they are the full 100% art played by those children, and they sound best when they're played by those children.
That's why I'm very interested in hearing it, because I know that's how you think. And that it's not like, I rather, like, because, for example, like the wind ensemble tradition is very, I don't know how it is, and I think in the UK it's the brass band. Maybe that's the big tradition there. Is that correct?
So we have wind bands too,
you also have wind
but
bands.
the brass band is a bigger tradition of that similar group.
Yeah, but here in the United States, the wind ensemble is a huge tradition. Like every college and high school has a wind ensemble, and there's tons of music written for them. But what we usually find is that these composers that write mainly wind ensemble music, they're writing it at such a level. They know that, okay, high school level, whatever that is, they're going to play whatever the common denominator high school level. But when they go to record the piece for real, to like have it on an album or something like that, they want to have like the most professional or best band possible to play it as the representative recording. 99% of the performances of that piece are not going to sound like that.
Sure.
Right? But you are thinking, no, all the performances, they have to sound like that.
Yeah, with the stuff I've written for primary school.
That's what I find that very interesting.
I would find that harder to do for teenagers, because in writing for primary school kids, there's still access to a wild abandon that I have worked hard as an adult to create in my own art, and this is very often accessible to this age. But I'm not sure I've tried to write for teenagers really, so I would find that a much harder prospect to achieve the thing that we were just talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in this concept. Mainly because recently I finished writing a piece for, I would say, 9 to 14-year-old range, so a little bit older probably than what you were writing for, and I just ditched the whole idea of using notation.
Okay,
I just used like graphical notation.
Okay.
And I had the director actually beat Arabic rhythms just on a loop with whatever percussion he had. I didn't even care what he had, just as long as it wasn't an Arabic percussion. I said, don't use an Arabic instrument, just use even drumsticks together, or even hit the music stand or anything, or even claves, just anything. And then the musicians, the students would just play any sound that isn't a sound that a teacher taught you. That's what I said. Great. Just play any sound.
That's a nice phrase.
Look at the graphical notation, interpret that however you want, as long as you're not playing a sound your teacher taught you. And listen to the rhythm and react to it some way. So it was like the most open thing I ever written, and it sounded like that too. It was like complete chaos. But my feeling about writing for this age students is, how do we give them agency when in their music making? Because like at that age, they have very little agency. They're always, they're used to just, all right, whatever my teacher tells me to do, that must be the right thing, and that's, I feel like, how most kids grow up, which is, you need a certain level of that. But I feel like a lot of kids, they don't have somebody telling them, hey, no, just this one time, do whatever the heck you want, So that was my one and only experience, by the way, with this medium. Otherwise, I would have no idea what to do writing more proper written down music. I really honestly would have no idea what to do with my language in that scenario.
There are some nice phrases though that about giving the agency. That's nice for writing for that group.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But so this album is not coming out for a while. So when this comes out, by the time you guys see this, we're not going to be able to hear any of these pieces in entirety, correct?
Well, it depends where you bring it out, but probably not, I'm afraid.
Yeah. So you got to keep in touch with Alec. Follow him on.
Yeah.
Where can people follow you mainly?
Instagram.
So Alec, what is the Instagram?
Dreammusics with 3 M's. Dream.
And I'll put it down in the description below, as well as your bio and all that other stuff. So thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been fun.